As we continue to talk about the Indian-Chinese relationship and the build-up across the border, today we have with us Lieutenant General DS Hooda. He's the former Commanding-in-Chief of the Indian Army's Northern Command. He is also the Northern Army's commander during the surgical strike, so he understands the terrain very well, and he comes with a lot of understanding of how the operations happen along the LAC as well as at the line of actual control and line of control. Thanks very much, sir, for taking your time. I want to first begin by asking you the build-up that we're seeing across the LAC. While we talk about de-escalation, while we talk about both the armies, the Chinese army and the Indian army gradually pulling back, there is still escalation as far as the build-up is concerned. There is no clarity. What is your assessment, sir, of the fact that there are maps on maps that are coming up now that shows that the Chinese continue to build tents along the LAC?
Yeah, so it's let me just put it in a nutshell and say the situation is extremely serious because after many years, I think after 1962. That we are seeing this kind of moves in Ladakh that are happening across a very wide frontage, a very large number of Chinese troops in a well-planned maneuver, if I may call it that, and in some areas have come across what we perceive as our territory or our line of actual control, and they've come into these areas and are today sort of digging in some places. At least we've seen pictures at Pangong. So I think what has also happened is if you just diverse yourself from the military part, I think it's also forced us to relook our whole range of relations with China, and that makes it much beyond the military situation to something that could lead to a reset of India-China ties.
All right. So for those who really do not understand, because there's a lot of information that's coming in right now, you have the TV that is reporting on a certain line, you have the papers which are reporting, and the experts, all of a sudden, there's a whole host of experts, when it comes to strategic affairs, especially with India and China. I want to know from you, sir, to simply break it down for our viewers. We're seeing multiple skirmishes. We are hearing about Pangong Sao. We are also hearing about what happened at Petrol Point 14. If you could simply break it down for our viewers, where are we right now when it comes to, multi-front, so to say, escalation with China?
So if you go from the south to the north, so the southernmost area where apparently the standoff is happening is at Pangong Sao. And at the northern bank of Pangong Sao, there is a differing perception where we feel, the actual line of actual control is further to the east, while the Chinese feel it is to the west. Now, what they have done is they have forcibly come and occupied areas up to their perception. Further north of this is the area of Hot Springs and Galwan, where we've had that very bloody incident on 15th June. There, what we are seeing is that the Chinese are around the LAC. I mean, it's difficult to say whether they've actually come inside or they're on their own side. Even if they have, it's not by much. So I think that's an area where, although there is a lot of focus because of the clash that happened on 15th, but actually they're not too much into our territory.
Okay.
And if you go further north, then you go to what is called subsector north and the areas of Depsang Plains. There again, there are reports that the Chinese have come into our territory and are preventing our patrols from, going to what we feel is the LAC. Now, yes, there are areas which are disputed and people are calling it disputed areas. The fact is there was an understanding between both sides that these disputed pockets will not be physically occupied by anybody. And I think that's where the major change has taken place by the PLA coming and physically occupying these areas.
Okay, so we are confirming now, because there's been a dispute on that as well when it comes to different political parties making a statement and the army, of course, making a different statement. We can confirm that yes, PLA army has come into Indian territory. Is that something that we are sure of now? We can say to our viewers.
Yes, we were sure of it even earlier. So I think where people were trying to say is that since it is sort of disputed, and therefore technically can it be considered as Indian territory? Now the fact is, on our maps we have a line which shows our perception, which shows our understanding, and I think we should be clear that anybody who oversteps that line has come into our territory. Uh, I think we need to take a clear position on this so that our stance is also firm. I mean, we can't be wavering about are they or are they not in Indian territory.
Right.
We don't hear such comments from the Chinese side. They clearly say that the Indians have overstepped, they've come into our territory. Uh, so I think the same ambiguity, that is being created, that should be set to rest. And from our side, as per our perception, there are areas, particularly at Pangong, so and in the area of Depsang Plains, where the Chinese have come into what we claim as our territory.
All right. I also want to know, sir, how prepared are we? Because a lot of our allies are saying now that we are committed to deliver. If the weapons are urgently needed and the ammunitions are needed for the Indian Armed Forces, we are ready to deliver them on time and maybe before the committed time. How prepared are we if the situation escalates at all?
Oh, we are fully prepared, and I know a lot of talk is there that we are going with a shopping list and buying some essential, ammunition, some equipment, etc. But I think that shouldn't create the impression that there are some major deficiencies that exist in the Indian Army. I think we are well prepared, both in terms of equipment and the fact that the soldiers are extremely well trained. They've been operating in these areas. And therefore, our levels of preparation to handle anything that that can happen on the LAC, our preparations are pretty strong. So I think let's put that back to rest. That there is some issues with our preparation. No.
All right. All right, sir, I think there's a consensus now across all Asia-Pacific region that China is throwing punches and provoking its neighbors. And that's something that Western countries are also resonating with. How do you suggest do we deal with a hostile neighbor, which is of the size and magnitude of China?
See, what you're saying is right. There is, let's call it a power differential, economic differential, military capability differential between India and China. And my fear is, as we look into the future, this differential is only going to grow. And so, can India purely on its own deal with a more assertive China? Maybe militarily, yes. But I think we also need to now start looking at alignments, alliances, like-minded people who are worried about the rise of China and a rise of China that is not peaceful. So we need to, I think, look at all aspects internally. That I'm talking about militarily, economically, diplomatically, as well as look at some alliances with like-minded countries who are also worried about China. I would think that's the way to go in future. For too long, we've tried to, keep ourselves sort of strategic autonomy, non-alignment, and these kind of issues. I think the rising threat from China is going to force us to take a relook at all these things.
Right. General, before I let you go, we know that the call to boycott Chinese goods is now strengthening. We've almost, gotten rid of the 59 Chinese apps that were operating, and some of them are very popular. Is that the best way to deal with right now? I know you mentioned that we have to now look at other strategic alliances. What is it? What do you envisage the Indian-Chinese relationship to be in the near future, sir?
See, there is a lot of talk about boycott of Chinese goods. I think we have to be practical and see what is feasible, what is possible. I mean, pharmaceuticals, for example, just heavy reliance on China, and if you boycott those goods now, I mean, when you are facing a medical problem within the country, how is that going to play out? So we need to be practical about this, but there are some areas, specifically in terms of technology in our critical infrastructure, in our critical areas. 5G, for example, that's going to roll out in India. I mean, these are areas where I think we need to keep Chinese companies out. this is the national security interest, and that is something that the government is looking at. We also need to start looking at promoting our indigenous industry, and I hope this realization now comes in that this over reliance and over dependence on China is something that's not good for the country. I'm not sure everything is going to happen in a hurry. So we need to take a long view, just as the Chinese do, of how we need to, promote ourselves, strengthen ourselves economically and militarily. I talked about alliances, etc., that we need to get into. A long-term view of how India and China are going to cooperate or confront each other in the future.
All right. General, thanks very much for taking your time, sir. Thank you.